Hey hey, and welcome back to the Moose Lady classroom. Whee! We are going to continue on with runes today, and I know Oscar has been missing you a lot, and he really wanted to continue on with the runes, so here we are. We'll put him right here so you know that you're not alone in the classroom. It's kind of creepy being alone in the classroom with the teacher, right? We will talk about runes today. It is probably the most talked about and discussed topics when it comes to Norse and Scandinavian history and culture and Vikings and all of that good stuff. Today we are covering the runes from a very specific angle. The runes in relation to, drum roll somewhere here. We will talk about the runes in relation to magic today, and what that is all about actually. How did that come about? What is that about? Let's talk about it. I had planned this video out for a long time, and it became just longer and longer and longer and longer. Instead of me putting out a 3-hour long video, I will give you the runes and magic in parts instead, so you can digest the information that I'm providing for you. And also so you have something to look forward to, because there's more coming. And I had specifically looked forward discussing something called Blodspawn and Spådom with you today, but that will be for part 2 instead. So let's take it in a somewhat chronological order. Agreed? Agreed? Good. We'll start with me stating the question, what is magic? Besides having fancy hats. I want to keep it somewhat simple, so I will give you the definition of what the word magic means. What does that say? Because we have to start somewhere, right? The word magic is a belief that someone or something or someone's can bend or control reality or their surroundings with the help of supernatural powers. That is the definition of the word magic. That is what that means. And these things, they can take place through rituals, spells and so on. The magical stuff, the wizardly stuff, the witchy stuff. And there's a bunch of different categories and types of magic, and there's different rituals and so on, and how different cultures define them and so on. But I want to keep it as basic and easily understandable as possible. Magic means someone controls or changes reality or their surroundings by a supernatural power or supernatural force that they are provoking to take action in some way. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the rune poems. The rune poems everyone knows about and no one knows about, basically. It's one of those topics. Everyone knows about them without knowing that they know about them. This statement will become much clearer the more I talk about them. The most common thing that you will run into when you type in runes in your search bar. And what happens then is that you get up a bunch of images usually with all kinds of different runes together with their, so to say, names and with their real meaning, the power that they withhold and so on, like wealth or love or luck or, those kinds of things. And it's very this magical, ancient, mystical concept. And what I want to discuss is, where does this all come from? I said something about rune poems, so let me explain that further. As well as I also want to go back to what I've stated before in this rune series, is that runes are a means of communication. However, it is very important that we keep, you and me and Oscar as well, in the back of our heads while talking about these things, is that when it comes to runes and communication and magic and all of that good stuff, we don't have a completed image of how Old Norse works, how Proto-Germanic works, how it 100% sounded like, how it all came together and so on. I will give you a simple example to be clearer. Now we're turning to those teacher methods again. So this rune, for example. Here we have the Tyr rune, or the T sound, right? The T. For us, with the Latin alphabet, it is very obvious, Tyr, T. It makes sense, right? We can relate to that, we can understand that. And it also looks like a T. Makes sense to us. However, when it actually comes to reading on rune stones and rune carvings and so on, this could also be a D. It could be a D sound or D. It could sound like nd, nt. When we only imagine that this sounds like T, we are severely mistaken because it also makes other sounds. And there's no way for us to know if these sounds are subordinate to this, to the t that we know today. Just because today we call it the T rune and we associate it with the Latin t sound. But it might as well be a D sound as well. And we don't know which one is the correct one, so to say. We have no one to ask anymore. That is what I mean when I say that we can't be 100% sure to know how this all works. Runes are complicated, languages are complicated, ancient languages, that's an adventure. Rune poems now then. Let's go. There are three main rune poems throughout history. It is the Old English one, or the Anglo-Saxon one it's called as well. There's the Norwegian one and the Icelandic one. And they have been used to kind of map out like the ancient kind of runes and the mindset and the understanding of the Nordic societies, and they have been compared to each other and so on. There's also been some discussions back and forth between the linguistics experts whether or not the Anglo-Saxon one should be compared to the Norwegian and the Icelandic one. The one in Old English, or the Anglo-Saxon one, is estimated to be from the 10th century. The original, however, was destroyed during a fire, so it burnt up. The version we have of it today stems from the 1700s. The Icelandic one is from the 1500s. The Norwegian one was from 13th century, somewhere around there, but that was also destroyed. The version we have of it today also comes from the 17th century. But the Anglo-Saxon one is the oldest one. However, there are lists of the English and Norse names of the runes that predates the rune poems. And these do not have like these defining verses that the rune poems have. And those go back to the late 8th century, somewhere around there. In order to remember something, it is easier if you have it on verse or in a song and so on. And I've actually mentioned the rune poems in relation to this. It is easier to remember and learn runes if you have them associated to a sound and to a verse or a song. And this is not my original idea. It is the whole, A is for apple, B is for banana and so on. That is not an original thought to have. But this is my personal interpretation to why they are connected to these verses, is to remember them rather to have these magical powers per se. But these lists and poems is why the runes are connected to these names. And these runic poems and kennings that was used very thoroughly back in the day. So a kenning is when you say something not straight out. It is very common practice within Swedish folklore. If you don't want to call the wolf to come to you, you will call him Grey Leg instead. You don't say wolf, because then you manifest wolf and the wolf will come and get you. So you call it Grey Legs, because then you can talk about it without having fear of it manifesting and coming and eating you up. So that is what a kenning is. So these verses and these kennings have kind of combined and made this lovely mix of the meaning within, or the real meaning, or the hidden meaning behind runes. That was a whole lot. Let me give you a recap. You're paying attention. The rune poems are lists of runes together with names and verses. And these verses include what could be tied together with these runes and their names. The rune representing an F sound. Wait, let me show you. So this would be the F rune, F, fehu. Let me read you the three different verses in the three different rune poems, what this rune would be tied to. Let's start with the Old English one. Fehu, wealth, is a comfort to every human being, yet everyone must share it freely if he wishes to gain glory before the Lord. The Norwegian one is fe. So now we're not talking about fehu, now we're talking about fe, wealth, causes strife of kinsmen, the wolf gets its food in the forest. pretty straight to the point with the Norwegian one. And then we have the Icelandic version, which is also fe. So fe is wealth, or fehu is wealth. Wealth is strife of kinsmen and beacon of the flood, and path of the grave fish, gold, king, beginning with F. So that's it. That is how it would go with the runes in the rune poems. And fehu and the F rune is all tied to wealth, the word for wealth, which of course when you look it up online you will get up that this rune means wealth. And it's, so to say, magical aspects and its magical meaning and its hidden meaning is wealth. One might say that this would be a kenning to wealth today. It's also important for me to mention that the Norwegian and the Icelandic rune poems, since they are the younger ones, they consist of the younger Futhark, while the Anglo-Saxon one, or the Old English one, consists out of 29 Anglo-Saxon runes. And those Old English or Anglo-Saxon runes, they have helped immensely for the understanding of the elder Futhark overall, in general, how to read it and translate it and so. Now you know what the basics of the rune poems are. So again, how many runes are in the younger Futhark rune poems? 16. And how many was in the Anglo-Saxon rune poems? Exactly, 29. You're doing a good job. Let's talk about other written sources that goes over runes in connection to magic. In the 14th century saga of Bosi and Heraud, there is mentions of the magical rune formula with the repeating runes showing up as a curse. When it comes to runes that are repeated in a row, there is this unwritten rule that runes never repeat, right? But usually when the runes show up in a sequence like that, it is tied to magic. There's also the saga of Egil Skallagrimsson. That's from the 13th century, that also includes runes in connection to magic. Specifically in this saga, Egil cures a very sick woman with the power of the magical runes. But it's also a cautionary tale how runes can be used to do the opposite if you do not know what you're doing and if you have bad intentions. In the Egil Skallagrimsson saga, there is a very, very sick woman that a young man tries to heal by carving 10 different runes on a whalebone, and he puts it in her bed. But since he doesn't seem to know what he's doing, or maybe he does, maybe his intentions were bad, she gets sicker anyhow. She doesn't get healed. So what Egil does is that he shows up, he throws these rune bones into the fire, and he carves new ones with different runes, and the outcome is different and she heals. A very popular and also well-known fact about magic and runes that you will bump into is, of course, the connection between the god Odin and the runes. This is a very exciting topic as well. So, the main god, Odin, he hung himself in the world tree to learn the secret of the runes, which is a very big dedication on his part. Good. We love someone who loves to learn. Around the 13th century, and also throughout different times, there is the tale of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. And this story has roots in so much older source material. What happens in this tale is basically that Odin punishes one of his Valkyrias. He kind of puts her in a little timeout and puts a sleeping spell upon her until a man would come and rescue her. It's very Sleeping Beauty-esque. Is also one of my favorite Norse tales. I'm not pushing it upon you, but read it, it's very good. Anyway, in this tale, Odin goes a little crazy after learning the runes and their secrets and their powers. He goes around and carves runes everywhere. He carves it on the ear and on the hoof of the horses that are dragging the sun chariot over the sky. He carves them on the chariot wheel that spins underneath the wagon of the one who kills Hrungnir. That's Thor. And since we recently talked about Viking body mods, he carves runes on the teeth of Sleipnir, his horse. He also gifts Sigurd the Dragon Slayer a horse called Grani, which he has also carved runes on the chest of the horse. He gets even so freaky, might I say, that he carves runes on a nail of one of the Norns. And maybe even freakier, he carves runes on the tongue of Bragi, the god of poetry and singing. Then he calms down a little bit and he carves them on his spear, the Gungnir. And he carved them into way more places than that, but you get my point. When he learned the meaning and magic behind the runes and the power of the runes, he carved them everywhere where he seemed fit. And if we were to analyze every single detail of this saga, this video would be way too long. So let's move on from that. And what is so interesting about the Sigurd saga is that we do have rune carvings and imagery from around the year 1000 AD. We also have rune stones like the Sparlösa one that I made a video about from around 800 AD, where it mentions how the runes were given to the humans by the gods. So this worldview and these ideas, they are not only a part of storytelling and sagas, they are a part of the ancient society and the mindset of the ancient society. Speaking of which, that is our next topic to go to. The actual archaeological finds that connects runes to magic as well. There's a lot of information in this video, I hope you're okay. We have already touched upon the repeating rune sequence and magic, and we will continue down that road a little bit. So when we speak about the archaeological interpretation, a repeating rune sequence have been seen through the lens of magical intent. In reality, we cannot say that it is always so, that it is always a magical intent. If a rune sequence is repeated, then that is per automatic magical. We cannot say that. We don't know if someone just really liked those runes and repeated them, or if they were practicing, if they were rune carvers in training, practicing to carve, and then sometimes if they had, if they had trouble carving one rune, they might have done it many times until they learned to perfect it. In some instances, it might be tied to magic. In some instances, it just might be, whatever. You know what? For the heck of it, I will show you something. If I show you this, do you understand what I will do with these lines? Let's see if I did it. Do you recognize this symbol? Many kids and teenagers have drawn this in school, all over our notebooks, all over the world. No one knows what this S comes from, why we kept doing it, or what it means. Maybe someone, if you know what this means, please tell me, because I have no idea. We can agree that there's nothing inherently magic about this. It is just something that we have done in the spur of the moment, and we have done it a lot because it feels good doing for whatever reason. So imagine in 1,000 years where people see this all over books all over the world and they are thinking, is this a cult? Is this some secret society? Is this magic? So keeping an open mind is very useful when talking about and thinking about and discussing things like this, because we don't truly know the intent behind these runes in all instances. However, I will talk about a sequence that is very heavily connected to magic work and spells. That is the Tistel, Mistel, Schistel sequence. And the sequence looks pretty similar to each other wherever you find it. It looks like this. In Denmark and Sweden, we have the exact same sequence of these runes. We have the Görlev stone in Denmark. And the interesting part about it is that the carver makes very specific claims where they say that I have placed the runes in the right order. So no one can come and say, excuse me, why have you carved the same runes all over again? You can't do that. That is not the rules. And on the Ledsberg rune stone in Sweden, which is here, the same exact sequence shows up again. I will show them next to each other. Tistel, Mistel, Schistel is the words you get deciphering this rune sequence. And this sequence is heavily theorized being a spell. What the specific function of this spell would be about is discussed, of course. But the talk goes something along the lines that it is to keep the dead, so to say. Or to keep the deceased safe from grave robbers, maybe, possibly. both possibilities can be found in other examples from these times. So no one likes grave robbers and no one wants a drauger at their door, so I would just take both of them and say both are equally as possible. The Norwegian example is from a church, a stave church in Borgund. It was built around the 12th century. It contains 4 different variations of the tistel, mistel, kistel sequence. And one of them is carved where it actually spells out the whole, it's not only the sequence, it is the whole sentence. It spells out with runes tistil, mistil, ok, thirithi, tistil, which translates to tistel, mistel, and the third thistle. Now we get into a muddy area like, oh, this is a church, what does spellwork have to do in there, why is it there, and so on. And the answer might have been found underneath a loose stone in the church, underneath these logs where they had this magical spell. And by the looks of it, it was a place where women, unfortunately, have had to bury their unwanted children. Or maybe children who just didn't make it. They were placed underneath this stone in the floor of the church in small chests. So maybe the tistel, mistel, kistel sequence was for them to find peace. Maybe that was intended to give them peace and for them to move on somewhere else, or at least not come back. Aside of these rune sequences with the repeated runes, there's also magic spelled out, so to say, with runes. One of these spells can be found at a runic carving that is called VG216, so VG216, or it's called the Högstena Galdren. So this galder, it goes back to around 1100, so the end of the Viking Age and the beginning of the medieval era. It was found in a cemetery when a grave was being dug. For the etymology's sake, the word galder is connected to magic itself. So this is a rune galder. It is associated to trolldom, which is Norse magic, and singing magical songs. Rungaldrar is not so much about singing, it is more about documenting and carving down and writing down spells and spell work and magic. So actually, when they were going through the whole phase of hunting witches in the 1600s, Rungaldrar was something that they were looking for to prosecute witchery. So they would specifically look for these type of symbols in order to identify magic users. This is a side note, but it is so ironic because I've seen the discussions online about the Galdrastafir and the Rungalders, such as the Ägishjälmur, right? You know these ones, you've seen them, right? And why this is ironic, because I have seen the discussion go so much to these are Christian symbols, these are not connected at all with paganism or magic, or you know. It doesn't make sense that anyone would look for a symbol that they are okay with to prosecute someone with witchery, right? Yeah, the literary sources on these symbols are very late, but that doesn't make them Christian symbols per se either. But that's another video, right? We can do a deep dive on that too. The Högstena Galdren looks like this, and it is a plate made out of bronze. What is so peculiar about this bronze plate is what it spells out. So translated, it says something like this. My spell is aimed towards the spirit which wants to walk again, against the riding, against the running, against the sitting, against the sinking, against the flying and traveling. All shall lose their life force and die. I think it's pretty certain to assume that this is a spell towards the dead walking and rising again. I don't know who this person pissed off that they even were afraid of this person as deceased, but it's pretty clear what it's all about. And this is one of the clean-cut examples of how runes have been used in spells and magic. And other clean-cut examples like these can be found on runestones as well. Because it's not always about hidden secret sequences or this stone was raised for this and this. It is pretty straightforward sometimes. Here we have VG67 or VG67. It basically says Frösten made this kummel. Kummel could be röse or a mound for Tora, his wife. And she was the best of humans, he makes sure to carve as well. Then at the end of this beautiful rune carving, it says something a little bit mysterious. I will say this word for word to you. Be thou a räte, and to an angry woman who carves or breaks the stone. This ending is an old curse. Basically it means that whoever dares to disturb Tora in her slumber by grave robbing or destroying her stones will be cursed. And they will be cursed in such a way that they will be perceived as a pervert in their society. And they will have to be cast out of society if they ever were to dare to touch any of Tora's stuff. Our last example for this episode is the Björketorp runestone, or DR360, so DR360. And this is an old carving. It is dated around the year 600 to 700 AD, so it's pre-Viking age, and it's also carved with the elder Futhark runes and during the transition to the younger Futhark. And around this runestone there's also a grave field filled with all kinds of exciting stuff. What this stone says is basically, honorable runes row I here hid, powerful runes, restless by anger, dead through cunning shall the one that breaks. I predict doom. Doom or destruction. None of them are good. I don't know if you noticed, but this also talks about being angry, which has been translated then to perversion, like with the other runestone that we talked about just now. And why it has been translated into angry is because ari is still a word we use in Scandinavian language today. Ari means angry, today. But back in these times, and why it has gone from angry to perversion, we are talking about the old meaning and the old Norse word of argr or ergi. This was a down-putting word that was used to demasculate men during this period in time. So since we still use the word ari but in a different context today, it has just been the go-to translated word. But when we talk about argr or ergi, which is probably the intended meaning of the word, it is really about demasculate men and has therefore been translated into perverted or perversion. Which makes sense, because if we go back to the first runestone I talked about, it specifically talks about an angry woman, which would then translate it into a man demasculated into being womanly. You kind of have to understand the etymology around these translations and around these words. So the translation starts from angry, it becomes argr, which is the real word being used here on these carvings, which comes further to the insult of being like a woman for men, which turns into perversion in the translation. Nonetheless, these carvers were laying a clear curse upon whoever were to mess with their stones. And since we talked in the beginning of this video about what the actual word magic means, even though it is not a very mysterious sequence here, it is more about understanding words and etymology and so on. This is also very clean-cut examples of wanting to or calling for some kind of supernatural occurrence taking place in order to form reality through words and intent. So these are a couple of examples that I hope you will find useful somehow. Because when you start learning about runes, the first thing you will run into is probably magic and their names and all of that good stuff. And it's always so useful then to have different examples, to have different connections and kind of see a pattern like, there are these mentions, there are these mentions, there are these and these and these examples. So then you know also where to start to look around if you're ever curious, where does it come from? Again, this is just a little dust corn of what I wanted to discuss with you today. I have so much more coming up on this topic. It is so much fun. I mean, I had fun. I hope you had fun. And you? Did you have fun? I also want to make something very clear with you guys. My education is within cultural heritage and archaeology, and I really enjoy real-life examples, and I enjoy keeping an open mind at the same time as I want to point out that we might actually not understand these things completely, and that's fine, right? Taking this as me coming off as critical or defensive, or that I'm attacking anyone in any way that is more leaning towards esoteric meanings or esoteric, an esoteric type of life, just because I'm this dry archaeologist over here. There is also this kind of popular thing, like having runes as a form of tarot cards, right? I don't want anyone going away from this video thinking that I have a problem with people who are into this stuff, or filling your everyday life with magic and spells and stuff like that. Everyone copes with life in different ways, and you know what? That's completely okay. I just want to inform you about what's out there, what examples we have, and then you can do whatever you want with that, okay? I mean, look at this guy. He is just ahead, and he's still here, and he's doing a good job. So you deal with your life however you see fit. You can take what you want from this video, and you can completely ignore everything I say if you want to. It's your life. That's that for the topic of this video. This is such a big topic. I will be back with the hat. Thank you so much for attending the Moose Lady School today, and I'm happy to see you back any day. I hope you leave our classroom with a good feeling. Hej då!